afternoon, everyone. Welcome to the Truth Marquee for our final event in here, and it's a lovely event. We closed last year with something very similar on John Henry Newman, and this afternoon we are looking at Blessed Dominic Barberi. I have a lovely panel here. It's a great joy to welcome Archbishop Bernard Longley, the Archbishop of Birmingham, who I know has a great passion for promoting the cause of Blessed Dominic Barberi of this diocese. He invited us all to pray and seek Blessed Dominic's intercession at Mass on Friday. Antonia Moffat is with us from EWTN GB and has spent many years promoting the messages of Divine Mercy on EWTN. Thank you, Antonia. And Professor Jacob Phillips from St Mary's University, Twickenham, is here, who will be speaking a little at the beginning, and then we'll open out into a panel. So thank you very much for joining us, and over to you, Professor.
Where's your daughter? Okay, so as with last year, I'm going to talk for about 10 minutes or so on Blessed Dominic Barberi, after which I'll hand over to my learned friends and we'll have a discussion about some of the features of this really remarkable life. So for those of you that aren't familiar with Blessed Dominic, I can say there's a huge amount to unpack, and I'm just going to give a very brief overview of some aspects of his life, but we really could do more than a whole weekend on such a rich and eventful life. So those familiar with Blessed Dominic's life might be expecting us to begin in the year 1792, when he was born, or maybe with the year 1845, when the most well-known event of his life arguably occurred, which was his reception of St John Henry Newman into the church. But I thought it might be good, and in keeping with the spirit of Blessed Dominic's life, if we began a little further back in history. And to do that, I'm just going to quote a paragraph from a secular historian on the period immediately prior to the Reformation in these lands. From the reports of foreign observers, he writes, it is clear that in the 14th and 15th centuries, the English were notable for their Catholic piety. They rivaled the Italians in their love of ceremony, and the Spanish in their devotion to the Virgin. The bells of London churches deafened those who were unfamiliar with them, and a continental observer noted of the citizens that, quote, they all attend Mass every day. And they say many paternosters in public, the women carrying around large rosaries in their hands. This was the dispensation and condition of England until the time of Henry VIII, our author goes on, and then he says it is open to question whether the legacy of the last 500 years will outweigh or outlast a previous tradition of 1500 years. Now that previous Catholic tradition of England, during those 1,500 years, should be the starting point, I think, for approaching Blessed Dominic's life, because his entire raison d'etre was the reconversion of England, the making present again of that vital and natural piety of Catholic faith, such that the English people might rediscover the invitation to share God's promises to his church. Now it's very odd, it's very strange, that a young man from a small hamlet 50 miles north of Rome should have dedicated his life to this cause. He was a child of humble origins, who was deeply pious and outstandingly intelligent, and he struggled with the faith in his youth and struggled greatly with his sense of vocation. He almost got married, but the Blessed Virgin intervened to remind him of his calling. And then he eventually joined the Passionist congregation in his early 20s. The Passionists were known for their profound devotion to Christ's passion, of course, which brought with it a particular strictness and severity. They had been founded in Italy by St Paul of the Cross in 1720 as a missionary order. Now the strangeness of Blessed Dominic's life begins here, because St Paul of the Cross, another Italian with very little knowledge of England, was known to have longed for this country to return to the church. And he had a vision once in which he sent Passionist missionaries here for this purpose. Now as a postulant, Blessed Dominic had one of his many mystical experiences in which he says he heard an interior voice, and the voice told him that he was destined to announce gospel truths and to bring stray sheep back to the way of salvation. And shortly after this, he was deep in prayer in his Passionist chapel, and so he writes, a word of which he then knew very little was to stay with him for the rest of his life. And he wrote, this is quoting him directly, a name remained most impressed on my mind, and it had this word, England. It was only later that one of Blessed Dominic's biographers realised that this prayer took place at the very same altar that St Paul of the Cross, the founder of his order, had had this earlier vision of sending Passionists here to convert us. And the biographer notes, why either of these two men should have been devoted to England defies all explanation. Now, it's been many years before Blessed Dominic could come here, 28 years in total, and there's much I could say about that, but I have to whiz over all that so we can continue our conversation. Whilst he was stationed in Rome teaching at seminary, he was able to meet some actual Englishmen for the first time after years of praying and wanting to come here, including Cardinal Wiseman, who was the rector of the English College, before becoming president of this very seminary in Oscott 10 years later. And he met one of Wiseman's converts, George Spencer, who was mentioned after Mass this morning, as became known as Father Ignatius Spencer, who's, everybody always says this, but I'll repeat it, is a distant ancestor of Lady Diana. But he did lots of other stuff as well. And he was to become a Passionist. And also Ambrose Phillips, who's a very important part of the story. And it was Phillips who asked Blessed Dominic to help train a recently ordained septuagenarian convert who was at the English College, called Sir Harry Trelawney, to say the Mass. And it's recorded that Wiseman, Spencer and Phillips were all astounded that this little Italian man professed a years-long devotion to an England he'd never even visited. Now, eventually he was to make it here, and the day on which he arrived in 1840 was, of all days, the 5th of November. But it was not plain sailing, and then, however, he'd been asked by Wiseman to come and take up station in Aston in Staffordshire, but the resident priest in Aston was more than a little aggrieved at his presence and didn't make him feel very welcome. So he came to stay here at Oscott and fine-tune his English until he could take up residence in Aston. He was a bit surprised to realise most of the priests on the staff here thought that Wiseman and Dominic were unrealistic and naive in their bold hopes for England's reconversion. At age 50 and having waited 28 years for this moment, he was finally able to prepare to launch his missions. He took up residence in Aston in 1842. It was on Good Friday of that year that he received his first convert. He realised there were more Catholics in the neighbouring town of Stone, and this just gives you a flavour of what his work was like. He went to hire a room in a pub in Stone where he could say Mass. Mud and rocks were thrown at him as he wandered around Staffordshire in his Passionist cassock, but every Sunday he heard confessions in Stone from early morning until 10 a.m, then said public prayers, then preached for an hour or so, after which he said Mass. There was a little break for lunch, and then Vespers at 3 p.m, catechism classes for adults and children, and at 6 p.m. he gave public lectures to non-Catholics, and it said about 500 people would attend on average. So new religious were attracted to his community, which had about 10 or so members. By 1843, he'd received 55 converts, and at this time, the second spring is obviously it's reaching something of a high point, and people like the Cistercians had founded at Mount St Bernard. At Mount St Bernard, they received 300 converts in the first year. The numbers of people coming in was really astounding, and he went on to give retreats and missions at far too many towns to mention. But in 1844, he was invited to visit the then Anglican Newman. And Newman wrote a very strange record in his diary where he says of Blessed Dominic, "When his form came into sight, I was moved to the depths in the strangest valley." And I think this is just him walking up the garden path. His very look had something about it that I could only call holy. Well, Newman recognised sanctity when he saw it, so just over a year later, Blessed Dominic was invited back to hear Newman's confession and receive him into the church. And as is well known, an avalanche of conversions followed. With incredible zeal and industriousness, Blessed Dominic's missionary work continued until his death, which was 4 years later in 1849, and quantifying the fruits of his work is almost impossible because of the number of seeds he sowed and people he brought in who went on to do so many other things. So we owe him a great debt, I believe. I just want to mention one story very briefly, which really made me chuckle, and then I'll begin the discussion. A woman came to one of his Passionist confreres and said that she'd had a vision of the Father of the Son. And she wanted to talk to Blessed Dominic about it. So he said, okay, fine, we'll have a chat. And she told him about this vision, and he asked her if she'd taken any drink earlier that evening. And she said, yes, she had 2 glasses of strong port. And he said, well, next time, why don't you have 3? Because you might see the Holy Spirit. But of course, I think on a more serious note, his religious name was Dominic of the Mother of God. And like Mary, perhaps, he's someone who is known in relation to another, who is, of course, Newman. And that is in itself is testament to his humility and his selflessness. But I've just dipped my toe in the water of Blessed Dominic's life. I know my learned friends know far more than I, so let's hear more from them about this remarkable life and witness. So, welcome, Archbishop Bernard and Antonia, if I may. I thought, seeing as we're very much on Blessed Dominic's turf here in the Midlands, we could start, Archbishop Bernard, by asking you to reflect perhaps on Blessed Dominic's relationship with this place and this part of the country as an adopted Midlander.
Well, a very good evening, everybody. I must say it's a great delight, first of all, to listen to Professor Jakes with your presentation today, and also to speak in this place about somebody who has been very close, and I think an important part of my own life, long before coming to Birmingham. I have a belief that the saints have a way of finding us. We think we find people that are going to be inspiring for us. We research about them and we learn about them and hear about them. But in those many ways, I think they have a way of finding us too and influencing our lives. I'm delighted that tonight here in Oscott, 2 of the Sisters of Das Werk are with us also from the college at Littlemore. And again, it's just a reminder of, I think, Blessed Dominic's intervention. We're praying that they might be able to get in despite the restriction on tickets here. So it's very good to see you, sisters. Here in Birmingham, it's been a fervent prayer of many people, and we've been praying a novena every summer, 9 days leading up to Blessed Dominic's feast day on the 26th of August for his canonization. Why do we pray for somebody who is already recognized by the Church as a blessed to be canonized? I think because I want his influence in our own diocese here in Birmingham, in this place where he stayed for, as you were saying, for several months before he could take up his mission in Aston by Stone. But I think the influence, if you consider the influence and the impact, which has already been hinted at today, on so many people, and through those people, on so many more. The influence of Blessed Dominic on St John Henry Newman consequently extended into our own time, beyond the reach of what he might have thought possible himself. So here in this place he stayed, he was patiently waiting, at least as patient as any Italian is normally, to take up his mission in Staffordshire. And in Staffordshire, the influence that he had, the impact that he had, but also as a base for establishing Passionist communities elsewhere across the country. The contact that he had too with the religious communities in this part of the world was also very, very significant, not least with the Benedictine sisters at Colwich, St Mary's Abbey. And again, it was a joy over this weekend to see some of the sisters from St Mary's Colwich Abbey continuing the tradition of Benedictine life there. And I've enlisted them too to pray for Blessed Dominic's canonization.
Thank you, Archbishop. And Antonia, we have here a bona fide, not only an expert in Blessed Dominic, but also someone who's been working tirelessly for that cause. Perhaps you'd like to speak about that cause and what attracted you to the one of the Blessed Dominic.
Well, I think it began when I was in my late 20s, and it was really his great love for England and the prayer for the conversion of England. And it wasn't just, yes, let's pray for the conversion of England. Wherever he went, he was imploring people to pray for the conversion of England. He said, if we begin a walk, we must end it by praying for England. He was somebody who incessantly offered everything for the conversion of this nation, for the conversion of each English person, each person here present, your ancestors, he would have been pleading for. And he knew how to plead. It was incessant, incessant, incessant. And I don't know whether any of you have ever prayed his most remarkable Lament for England, based on the Lamentations of Jeremiah. It is the most heartfelt, heart-rendering prayer that any of you will ever pray. I myself prayed it on my own at Our Lady's statue in the chapel here yesterday out loud. It takes 45 minutes to pray it out loud, and you will be changed by praying the very words of Blessed Dominic for our beloved land. And there's something about that we Catholics of today have no real understanding of what intercessory prayer is all about, that it must be constant and sacrificial and penitential and pleading, and be willing to sacrifice yourself and make reparation for the sins of this country. And in this document, the Lament for England, you'll see every aspect of intercession played out. And there's a lesson in it for us today of how we must plead and not give up for this beloved nation of ours. When Blessed Dominic arrived in here to Oscott College, the church, obviously we'd just come out of Catholic emancipation, but the Catholics were very few. They were growing, but it was mainly through Irish immigration, and we were a poor and very much uncatechized population of Catholics. So the church was at a very weak point in its history. And in some ways, the time we're in now, although we have great hope, you know, we are living in a time where we've perhaps got parishes full of people who do not really know their Catholic faith well. And we can learn a lot from Blessed Dominic's own writings, but his own autobiography that he wrote is not yet translated into English so that we can all read it. So there is a work to be done to raise awareness of Blessed Dominic and his great love for England and the conversion of England through actually getting into print some of the documents that he actually wrote. And I would say that we absolutely need to print the Lament for England, albeit that some of the language maybe need to be updated. But remember that with Blessed Dominic, there was not ever any compromise on any of the truths and doctrines of the Catholic faith. So none of that must ever be undermined in anything that's printed about Blessed Dominic Barberi. And one of the things that once happened was that some of his Passionist brethren once said to him, will you pray for us after your death? And he said, yes, only if you keep the rule.
Well, let the lesson be understood. Good. So, I mean, one thing I noticed from reading up on Blessed Dominic was the zeal and the hope. And this was someone who expected to see England reconvert fully, possibly within his lifetime, and never lost hope and never lost zeal. I was wondering, how might we continue his legacy and witness today in the spirit of Blessed Dominic Barberi? How are we being called to live out our Catholic faith today? That was a question for you, Archbishop Leonard.
One of the remarkable things, I think, which has been a feature of Blessed Dominic's life, was that although the relations between the churches was very limited, Dominic in his own way was ready to see already the seeds of goodness and truth in other people. And the conversations that he had with Anglicans, particularly when he was able to meet with them both in Rome and then, of course, coming to England, they indicate that he had an extraordinary and very unusual kind of respect, a respect for the work that God was already achieving within other people's lives. I think an understanding of the fruits of their baptism, but also a real desire to see the fruits grow within them. And so to see them themselves living within the fullness of communion within the Catholic Church was always something which he saw was ultimately for their good and their perfection. And I think today the ecclesial dialogue that we have with other churches, while it's important, it needs to extend also to our individual appreciation, to build up the sort of relationships which he was ready and able to build up with individuals, which lead to a deepening of faith and an awareness that there is a journey which can be accompanied. Blessed Dominic was chosen by St John Henry Newman. John Henry asked him to come to hear his confession and to receive him into full communion with the Catholic Church through receiving Holy Communion during the Mass which he celebrated in the library at the college in Littlemore. That openness, I think, on his part was very significant, and also the insight that St John Henry Newman had into the life and the quality of Blessed Dominic. Newman had spoken himself about he was intellectually convinced of the truth of Catholic faith. In his mind, he saw that this was the fullness of truth was within the Catholic Church. But in his heart, and remember he chose as his motto, cor ad cor loquitur, not mens ad mentem loquitur, mind speaks unto mind, which he could very easily and readily have done with the superb intellect that he possessed. But he chose heart speaks unto heart. And in Dominic, he realized that he saw not only a faithful Catholic, but he saw the goodness for which he was looking. And there was one occasion when St John Henry Newman asked if only he could see an expression of goodness within a Catholic, then he would be able to take that final step. So for us today, to look as both of them did at each other and to see the goodness and truth within them, but to know that this was something that could grow, I think our own lives can be influential, particularly in those individual relationships with others who are not at one with us in the Catholic faith.
Thank you, Archbishop Bernard. This aligns very nicely with one of the quotes I had from one of Blessed Dominic's biographers, in which he's described as austere but never forbidding. His holiness shone through, and so he was attractive to others, be it the great intellectuals of his day or the smallest of children, be it members of his own community or people from other denominations. He was very much a people person, for the simple reason he trusted totally in God being a very real and active presence in his life. And that was something that shone through and attracted people to him from a multitude of different backgrounds. Now, Antonio, I have to confess, I Googled you in preparation for this panel. And I saw you have a history of organising public professions of faith and pilgrimages and things of that nature. Do you think they're an important part of continuing Blessed Dominic's witness to the people of England in this day? And if so, why?
Well, absolutely. And of course, in 1995, I was part of a big procession that we did from Stone to Aston to reenact the daily walk that Blessed Dominic did between the two, where he'd often get stoned. And he would always carry the Blessed Sacrament with him. So we actually organised a great procession which followed a symposium at Stone, where different sisters and priests spoke about the heroes and heroines of the Second Spring. So I'll come back to that in a minute. But we had this wonderful Blessed Sacrament procession, and 1,000 people attended. And of course, nobody ever thought at the beginning to ask, well, how far is it? From Stone to Aston, it's actually 3 miles. And of course, Archbishop Couve de Merville at the time and Bishop Pargetta, and I can't remember the name of the other auxiliary at the time, were the 3 bishops who were processing with Jesus. Well, by the time we arrived at Aston, I mean, they and everybody else was totally exhausted. But it was one of the most wonderful public witnesses with the Blessed Sacrament that I've ever been privileged to attend, and also to be part of the organising of it. And it was all to the whole focus, that's why we didn't think about distances or anything else, was that we wanted to reenact the very way that Blessed Dominic did every day as part of his mission when he first began his work for the conversion of England at Aston by Stone. So yeah, very, very important. But yes, and I've also been involved with a lot of work to do with our National Shrine of Our Lady of Walsingham. And of course, everything that we've done with the Dowry Tour, taking Our Lady of Walsingham to the different Catholic cathedrals, and all the all-night vigils and vigils of prayer that I organised over 35 years at the National Shrine were all under this banner of Blessed Dominic Barberi to pray for the conversion of England. And I also began all-night vigils for, we did those for 9 years it was 7 years, every last Friday of the month in the French church in Leicester Square in the 90s, which was all about intercessory prayer for the conversion of England. And we would all regularly pray, well, I would lead the Lament for England in the French church in London. We did pray it once or twice in Walsingham, but it was there was something quite remarkable, as I say, if you get hold of this document, to actually pray it publicly and out loud, and then you really will understand what public and persistent intercession's about. And can I just say, about following on from what Archbishop Bernard just said, that Blessed Dominic, actually, this is his own writing, wrote it's about a pacific discussion upon controversial subjects between a Catholic and an English Protestant by a lover of peace and Christian unity. Well, the lover of peace and Christian unity, of course, is Blessed Dominic, and the English Protestant at the time was a Mr. William. And basically, this book has many conferences where Blessed Dominic is in discussion with Mr. William about all the problems of the 39 Articles and all the aspects of the Catholic faith that many Protestants and Anglicans would have problem with. And they are all carefully explained and disseminated in a most remarkable way here by Blessed Dominic. And I would also advocate that this book should be republished, but it needs somebody who's theologically competent to update it in the language of the modern times, but as I said before, but with no compromise concerning the truths of the doctrines and morals of the teachings of the Catholic Church. But I think this book would be a great help to many who are considering coming to full communion with the Catholic Church in our times. And I know some members of the Ordinariate of Our Lady of Walsingham have read it and found it so helpful. And I would like to say, on the subject of the personal ordinariate of Our Lady of Walsingham, that if Blessed Dominic has still been alive in 2011, he would have been celebrating with utmost joy the establishment of the personal ordinariate of Our Lady of Walsingham by Pope Benedict XVI.
Thank you. Now, Blessed Dominic wrote a lament for England, lamentation of England. Now, this is the last session of the day, so I'm very keen this doesn't become a lament. So we're going to touch on this very briefly before we leave on a more hopeful note. But Blessed Dominic had immense perseverance. He was pelted with mud and rocks. He had to face a population who were far more religiously literate than we are today, but of course were religiously literate in a way that was formed by a deeply Protestant culture by that point. And he also faced what we today call xenophobia. He had lots of mocking for his accent and his questionable grasp of English at times, and all of that kind of stuff. So today I was wondering, where are we called to greater perseverance in our attempt to continue this legacy? So I wondered, Archbishop Bernard, if you could speak, what do you think are the particular obstacles we face today, and how might we surmount them?
Forgiveness was something that Dominic practiced. You mentioned Professor Jacob, the being pelted with stones, and it said of him that when stones were thrown at him, he picked them up and kissed them and put them in his pocket. And the impact that must have had upon the people who had thrown those stones would have been immeasurable, as a sign of the acceptance of God's will and also forgiveness. I think in today's society, which is so unforgiving of the mistakes and the failures which we see around us, we ourselves have to reflect the reconciling power of Christ's cross and the resurrection. And I think Blessed Dominic is a good example of that for us. Second thing is, I think we do need to engage intellectually with others We need to try to meet them at every level of their understanding. And sometimes Blessed Dominic is compared with St John Henry Newman as the simple Italian priest alongside the great English intellect. But we mustn't forget that, as Antonia has reminded us, Blessed Dominic was a theologian distinguished in his own way and responsible for the formation of members of his own congregation. So he was entrusted with the formation in southern Italy of men who were entering into the Passionist order, and indeed entrusted with the formation of new communities in Belgium and then eventually here in England. And I think the third thing to draw, my final really, is that the significance of God's presence in our midst and the impact, the power of prayer. Dominic, as a Passionist, would have been familiar with whenever Passionists gathered together, that somebody, this would be when they were socializing recreation, that every 15 minutes, one of the members of the congregation had the duty of standing up, whatever the individual conversations might be about, and saying simply these words, the presence of God. A warning, an indication, a reminder that all our conversations should be undertaken in God's presence. So if you're about to say something unpleasant, well, remember the presence of God. But Dominic's sense of the power of prayer is summed up for me in something which I hope will inspire us to continue praying and asking God for his canonization, for the miracle that's needed there. When he said, I consider it should be held as a maxim that when God stirs the hearts of many to ask for any one thing, it is an evident sign that he wishes to grant it.
That's wonderful. Thank you, Archbishop. And again, it does align quite nicely with one of the quotes I didn't give at the beginning, this talk of the Passionist spirituality and its devotion to the Passion. Because I think today in evangelization, we tend often to look for indications that we're being successful, and it's all about numbers and all this kind of stuff. And Blessed Dominic would see, he was not thinking in terms of quantifiable success, but thinking in terms of imitating the passion of the Lord. And there's one of his, a wonderful quote of his I stumbled across where he said in prayer, if you, God, wish to condemn me to suffer all the pains that the English would have to suffer if they were damned, I am content, provided only that they all return to you. Where he was really had this very real sense of his evangelization being modeled on the Passion of Christ. Good. Okay. Well, in looking at Blessed Dominic, the word that really shines through for me is, of course, zeal, an incredible zeal. And I feel some of that zeal being at WeBelieve. It's a remarkable event, I think. And I was saying to someone earlier today that when I became Catholic in 2008, there was nothing like this. This is really quite remarkable to see. It's a wonderful occasion and a real sign of hope. So I thought it would be nice to finish on the theme of zeal. And you've given one answer to this already, Antonia, with the Ordinariate, but I'm sure there's some more. There's always reasons to be hopeful. But what do you think are the signs of hope for the reconversion of England today? And what do you think Blessed Dominic would approve of in our Catholic life here in England in the year of our Lord 2026?
Well, certainly he'd be very happy about WeBelieve. And the fact that, of course, he came here, as has already been mentioned, in 1840 for 3 weeks, hoping that he would be going immediately to Aston Hall. And of course, he had the opportunity to spend a lot of time with Father Ignatius Spencer, or George Spencer, before he became a Passionist priest. And it was really here. And of course, he was only here 3 weeks initially. Then the following year, in 1841, when he came permanently on the 5th of November, he actually was, well, he would call it stuck here for 4 months. But it was actually a very fruitful time, because he was able to spend time with Bishop Wiseman and with Father Ignatius to really assess the situation of difficulty that he was walking into. So although, yes, his whole mission emanated from Aston Hall, it really began, and the whole vision and putting it into practice was planned here in Oscott College. So therefore, I think that the fact that we're having these WeBelieve conferences to pray to prepare for the great Jubilee of Redemption. It's very special to be here. And it said, I mean, there's a longer quote that Father Spencer wrote to a cousin of his about how Blessed Dominic complained when he was here that there was too much food. There were too many windows keeping the weather out. There were too many chairs to sit on, too many tables to sit at, and basically there wasn't enough penance while he lived here at all. And then I learned yesterday from Joanna Bogle's history tour that apparently he wouldn't sleep in one of the beds. He actually slept in the choir loft, which I've had the privilege to go up into today in the chapel. Because all the time he knew that that offering sacrifices and penances were also part and parcel of this great mission to pray for the conversion of England. So yes, I think we believe, and as I said, he absolutely would have been cheering about the ordinariate of Our Lady of Walsingham, and I think he would be at the helm of all the pro-life activities that are now going on, the Great March for Life, all those who are working in hidden ways to stand against abortion and all the attacks on marriage and family life, and all that it means to be truly human. It's absolutely certain that Blessed Dominic will be with us and is with us and at the helm of that in intercession from heaven as we speak now. Because we are being attacked in a way as Catholics, and we have a parliament full of people who are passing laws that go against every commandment and all the teachings of the church. And we need strong advocates to stand up against these dreadful, evil laws that are undermining life from the moment of conception to natural death.
Thank you. And I'll pass that same question on to Archbishop Bernard, some signs of hope.
I think being here with Antonia, whom I've known for many years now, she herself is a very good example of the zeal that we need. And I think also that I'm very grateful to her, and also to Father Julian Booth, priest of our own archdiocese, who's the promoter of the causes, in particular for the cause of Blessed Dominic. I have to say, when Antonia, when you were quoting those Blessed Dominic's view of the life here in the seminary, I think I noticed Father Michael Glover, who's on the staff of the seminary, eagerly writing down those various complaints to share with the modern seminarian. But don't take too many windows out of the building keys. But I think, and also I'm pleased that Antonia has mentioned the sanctity of life, and it is good that some of us here, seeing the Good Counsel Network represented, and others who life at the organisation, it's interesting to imagine the things which would have been really significant causes for Blessed Dominic today, all consistent with the fundamental foundation of his faith, his knowledge of the scriptures, and his propagation of the teaching of the Catholic Church. So thank you for the opportunity to present a little more of Blessed Dominic, maybe for the first time to some of us gathered here today, as we ask you for your prayers and your witness, and indeed the zeal which you can bring to this cause too.
Thank you. Okay, well, I think that brings us to the end of our reflections, but I have only dipped a toe into the water here of what I've done in preparation for this session, and I've learned a great deal from my two learned friends, so thank you so much. But I can say if you do start reading up on Blessed Dominic Barberi, there's a huge amount there, and a huge amount yet to be translated and published. I believe Antonia wants to recommend Gerard Skinner's, Father Gerard, who's done this wonderful biography of Dominic Barberi, which is a wonderful place to start. Highly recommended. And my first encounter with Dominic Barberi years ago, and I never thought I'd be sitting on a stage doing a panel on him with an archbishop and Antonia. But But was this passage which came to mind from a biography of Newman from the early 20th century. So I'll just end with this one sentence, won't be. And he describes Newman's conversion thus: as a wet October evening, when Newman knelt at the feet of a little Italian passionist who isn't even named, I just knew there was a little Italian passionist involved, has become one of the great moments of English history. For here, these two very unlikely men met in the awesome presence of a reality far greater than they. And that sentence stayed with me. And in preparation for this, I thought, what was that? I've come across this mention of someone like this before, and I found it, and it still seems very resonant to me.
Thank you. Just thank you again, Antonia, Archbishop Bernard, and Professor Jacob, for a delightful conversation and sharing with us, each of you, your passion for this great figure, this passionist, and a very fitting note on which to end the content here in the Truth Marquee at this festival, an encouragement to be zealous for the faith in this country, to pray for the conversion of England, and to seek to the intercession of Blessed Dominic in the hope that he might one day be canonized. There is a lovely CTS book on the conversion of England where Cardinal Vaughan has an introduction speaking at length about Blessed Dominic and his great zeal for this country. So do take up those prayers as you go forth from here, zealous for this country. So thank you so much for a beautiful presentation.